everybody. This is Busted Business Bureau. I'm Christian Borky. This podcast is produced by the Lincoln Lodge. If you like the podcast, you can send me money on patreon.com/bustedbizbureau. Also, rate, comment on the podcast. It really helps me out with the algorithm if you engage with it online. If you're listening in 2022, please nominate me for the Vanity Chicago Reader Award Popularity Contest. I want to win. There's a link in the description for that. With me for today's episode is a famous sweetie pie, beloved friend of the podcast, Christian McCann.
Hello.
I put beloved sweetie pie in the script.
Wow, I love that.
Christian, I want to jump right in to today's episode by talking about you. You have a tattoo on the side of your body with a man's face, and under it is a caption, "Now do you believe?"
Yes.
The man is holding his face in his chin like a sweet little boy.
That's right.
And it's so charming. Can you tell me who this man is and the context of that quote?
That man is Rick Jeanneret. He was the longest tenured announcer at his retirement last year for the Buffalo Sabres. He is somebody that I've listened to call Buffalo Sabres games since I was a child, near and dear to my heart. And my grandmother one day reserved the front page of the Buffalo Sports, the Buffalo News sports page, with that picture of him holding his chin in his hand, knowing that myself and my cousin love this guy. So one day my cousin came to town and we both got tattoos of Rick Jeanneret on our body with "Now Do You Believe" underneath it. And "Now Do You Believe" comes from one time the Buffalo Sabres were playing the Ottawa Senators. The Buffalo Sabres barely creeped into the playoffs. They were the 8th seed. Nobody picked them to do anything at the beginning of the season. Made it in, and they played the Ottawa Senators, which they were the 1st seed. And everyone picked the Ottawa Senators to win the Cup that year. And the Buffalo Sabres swept them, and which means that they won 4 games out of 7 in a row in the first round. With a goal by Jason Pominville, who streaked down the left wing and wrapped around Ray Emery to put the puck in the back of the net in overtime to sweep the Ottawa Senators. And as the entire team spilled onto the ice and celebrated with each other, Rick Jeanneret famously called "Now Do You Believe" in only a way that he can do it.
Yeah. This is the longest I've ever gone without saying something on a podcast. That should tell you how hungover I am. So I want to expand more on the fact that nobody picked the Sabres to do anything that year because some things happened before the Sabres played their 2005-2006 season. So 2002-2003 was a little rough for them because the Buffalo Sabres were at one point owned by John Regas. And if you've listened to this podcast extensively, you would know that he was the founder of Adelphia, who went to prison famously. He was sentenced in 2005, but he was indicted in 2002 for wire fraud, mail fraud, embezzling, etc. So the Busted Business Bureau universe expands. So the Sabres did not have an owner for a little bit there. 2003-2004 was tumultuous because of pretty obvious reasons. 2004-2005, there was no hockey.
That's right. Yep.
We'll be revisiting this extensively in this episode. So in 2005-2006, they came back scrapping with a lot to prove, and prove they did. As we talked about in the MLB and NFL episodes, Major League sports are rife with labor issues resulting in partial season lockouts. But the NHL is the only Major League franchise to have canceled an entire season because of labor disputes. It's mind-blowing to me. The 2004-2005 season simply didn't exist. There was no Stanley Cup. It's crazy. Do you remember that year?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Was it devastating personally?
Yeah, that was tough, especially for somebody that just looks forward to the hockey season. You know that I've talked to you about Gary Bettman, and I'm not going to try to get ahead of us, but yeah, it was times like that where you're just like, come on, like this is the only thing I like, you know? Why can't I have it? This is my one
personality trait, please.
I've been waiting.
So this episode is fueled by a few questions and points of curiosity for me. To start, why does the 5th largest sport in the world, it's only behind football, baseball, the NFL, MLB, NBA, and the EPL, English Premier League Soccer. So why does the 5th largest sport in the world, first of all, have sanctioned fistfights starring guys with knives on their feet? What kind of batshit sport is that? But mostly, how could a major league sport, again, ranked 5th on the globe in terms of revenue, cancel an entire season? How desperately bad are labor relations in the NHL where that's a thing? And that is what today's episode is going to be about. Right. Yeehaw. So let's do some window dressing before we get that deep into it. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of the NHL NHL. Then you tell me about hockey culture, fighting, all the stuff that you talk about. And I will sit here fighting a hangover desperately. And then we'll talk about health insurance. Sound like a plan?
Sounds great.
Amazing. So for those uninitiated, as I was before meeting you, the NHL is a collection of franchises in both the U.S. and Canada, which is a dumb name for it because it says National Hockey League, but it's more than one nation, famously. So it's a choice. That'll be important later. So if you commit, let's say, like wire fraud and you're employed by the NHL, what jurisdiction's laws are you following? Are you following Canada or the U.S.? That'll be a question later.
Yeah.
That'll come up later. The NHL, mostly though, was literally born out of spite. Specifically hatred for one guy, Eddie Livingstone. Do you know about any of this?
No, I don't.
Oh, yeah, baby. So in the early 1900s, there's this association of rich dudes in Canada that own hockey teams. They, sell tickets to the games. They own these teams. It's like 6 of them. That's what I wrote in the script. There's 6 hockey teams during this time, all in Canada. When World War I began, the Canadian government created a hockey team out of its military infantry in order to hype up the war effort. And this is before anybody was really meaningfully sent overseas. It's military history and hockey. I'm so girly today. Ordinary Canadian citizens were drafted into the military for World War I, including some of Eddie Livingstone's members of the Blue Shirts. He owned the Canada Blue Shirts hockey team. The team name was the 228th Battalion, which is a sickening name for a hockey team. I don't know why they don't bring that back.
I wish that still existed today.
Yeah, I would go to the 228th Battalion game easy. I would get all the merch. It's a sick name. Livingstone, who had many other issues with the owners, he'd gotten into contentious lawsuits, he threatened to buy out another owner, and then that other owner was like, I'm just going to buy you out for a higher price. Whole thing. Drama, he's cantankerous, everybody literally hates him. So when Canada decided to send dudes more meaningfully overseas for World War I, most of the other hockey teams in the original 6 were completely decimated as well. Just random dudes from the hockey team getting sent over to the war. Consequently, the other 5 owners had a meeting to reform their hockey organization. They were restructuring, whatever. Jamie Bradburn with the Ontario Educational Communications Authority writes it as such, quote, when the 228th Battalion withdrew from the NHA in February of 1917, having been called up to fight in Europe, the other owners saw their chance. The league held a meeting 3 days later. Livingstone declined to attend due to illness. Instead, he sent a private telegram to the league president indicating that he supported a 5-team circuit for the rest of the season. The other owners, whose teams like Livingstone's had been decimated by the First World War, wanted to divide the Blue Shirts among themselves to replenish their own team's lineup and just run with 4 teams. And so it went. Toronto was suspended for the rest of the season, and Livingstone was not compensated for the canceled Blue Shirts games or for the players he was compelled to loan out. And out of those 4 teams comes the NHL. They just recalled themselves the NHL.
Huh. Okay. Well, the original 6, when you say that.
It's not that original 6.
Okay. That's what I was wondering.
There's a different original 6 that comes out of the NHL later. And that's the original 6 era was.
Sure. Great.
Yeah. So those owners went on to separately form the NHL. Out of the teams that were sort of left, Livingstone was not included circa 1917. His Wikipedia page is literally written like he's an old-timey fucking cowboy villain, the way that everyone hated him. Quote, Livingstone outlived his enemies. Sam Lichtenstein, who died in 1936, Frank Calder, who died in 1943, and Fred McLaughlin, who died in 1944. Livingstone died the day before his 61st birthday in 1945. I guess he outlived his enemies, though, so...
Good for him.
Who's the real winner here? Who's laughing now? The NHL broke into the U.S. in 1924 with the expansion team of the Boston Bruins, which will be a centerpiece of this story. Do you know when the NHL started requiring helmets?
I don't know the year. I know, the era. And I know that... Okay, I know that they were optional for a while.
They were. It wasn't necessarily optional. So it was 1970, which is 2 years after a guy died, doing hockey. He's the only guy to ever die in an NHL game because of, what happened in the game. If you were contracted before 1970, it was optional. I don't believe it was optional for everybody else.
So you're kind of grandfathered in.
Yeah, you were grandfathered in, and most of the guys were like, I don't want to wear a helmet.
Right.
It's too hot, I'm throwing
the
up.
old school, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then the last guy to ever play without a helmet, I believe, was 1997. Last game ever played.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. He was
late,
the only one not wearing a helmet, too. He just was like, I don't want to. Anyways, that was a tangent. There was an effort to unionize hockey players in 1957 that ultimately failed. It failed because the owners sent any of the players who joined the union into the minor leagues. So they said, nope, fuck that. We're shutting that down instantly. They sued the owners for this. They went to the Canadian court. Ultimately, this completely dashed any union efforts for a decade. As time went on, players are more and more dubious about their pension information because the NHL, I guess, offers pensions to players. The information was being withheld from them, and out of this growing tension, a star is born. The man who forms the National Hockey League Players Association, which is still active today, is named Alan Eagleson. Alan Eagleson is a darling of Canada who invented the Canada Cup. Are you familiar?
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Canada Cup?
I don't know a lot about it. I'm just familiar.
I guess you know what? That's on me.
Can you tell me about it?
I could do my best. Canada Cup was an international hockey competition because I guess NHL players aren't allowed to compete in the Olympics, but I feel like some of them have. So honestly, I skimmed this part of the Wikipedia page. It's not really that.
That's been kind of like on and off. Like sometimes they have been, sometimes they haven't been.
Okay.
Sometimes players have boycotted the Olympics.
Slay.
Yeah, so it's
So it was meant to be an international hockey tournament in Canada. Alan Eagleson, it's like his brainchild, and it brought a lot of international attention to hockey and to Canada specifically. Canada won it like 4 times. The Soviet Union won it once. Oh, there was one particularly heated thing during a game. The Soviet Union police nearly arrested Alan Eagleson because he was getting really mad over what was ultimately a rigged game. And so he makes this big stink. He's like on the ice. The police are like, doing whatever. They just let him sit for the rest of the game, so I guess nothing happened. But that big cultural moment makes Alan Eagleson like a gem in Canada. People love this guy.
sure.
So I will withhold any further information about Alan Eagleson while I continue to dress the set. The NHL is not the only professional hockey league. How are you doing, by the way? Is this making any sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering where you're going with this. Are you going to talk about players defecting from Russia?
No. You could talk about players defecting from Russia.
There's a player named Alexander McGillney that defected from Russia famously, of course, he played for the Buffalo Sabres. And there's a really good documentary out there about the staff that had to go out to Russia and basically steal him, like evade the Russian government and get into a jet and illegally fly him out of Russia to the U.S. so he could play hockey here.
Fucking slay.
Yeah, and that guy was fast.
The guy, Tim Horton of Tim Hortons, played on the Buffalo Sabres too.
He did. He also played for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah. That was what he more famously played for, right?
Do you know how he died?
DUI, 44 years old.
Yeah, he was going 100 miles an hour on the QEW, Queen Elizabeth Way.
The QEW, famously.
That connects Toronto and Buffalo. Went through a concrete wall, and that was the first Tim Hortons drive-through.
That wasn't funny. I'm keeping that in, though. I'm going to let that joke be on the podcast, and everyone's going to be like, I don't like this guy anymore. Is that like you know what? I have no further questions about this. So we're still talking. Oh, sorry. The NHL is not the only professional hockey league in the 60s and 70s. You're embarrassed over there.
No, I'm not. I have been waiting to make that joke for so long. I'm so happy right now.
I'm glad you enjoyed that joke. I didn't. The NHL is not the only professional hockey league in the 60s and 70s. There's the Western Hockey League, the World Hockey Association, the International Hockey League, etc. This will become a sticking point. We're still talking about a time when the NHL is struggling to establish itself as the hockey cultural juggernaut we know it as today. Anyways, the NHLPA forms in 1967. In 1972, the NHL grants limited and restricted rights to players. However, it was not until 1995 that the NHL granted players the right to become truly unrestricted free agents, which is a huge sticking point. We talked about free agency in the MLB episode. Check that one out if you haven't yet. There is no salary cap during this time, but also the players are unaware of how much other players are making. The NHL does not disclose any financial information to the players. So this is basic window dressing for the scandal that we're going to be talking about. The other bit of window dressing I wanted to do was I wanted to talk about how dangerous hockey is. Mm-hmm. So before, the only NHL death was in 1968, which was a direct result of not wearing a helmet. However, the list of people post-helmets who've had a really, really, really tough time with their injuries is pretty big. Hockey's a dangerous sport.
It's brutal.
Can you tell me about Clint Malinchuk?
Clint Malarchuk.
Malarchuk. Yeah. That's not what I wrote.
Yeah. Clint Malarchuk, he was a goalie for the Buffalo Sabres, and he was a decent goalie, but he's most known for one day on the ice, a player's skate got close to his neck and nicked his neck, and he cut his, I believe, I don't know which vein or artery that it cut, but it cut one of the big ones and interrupted the game. And before you knew it, it's graphic. You can see it online. You probably don't want to, but it's just there was a lot of blood on the ice, just spurting out of his neck. He whipped his goalie helmet off. Everyone thought that we were just watching this guy die on the ice right now. And if it weren't for the quick actions of some of the training staff that were able to suture him up quickly, I can't believe they even had the equipment on hand to do that. It's been said that normally there's not that sort of that like first aid kit around that's so accessible to suture somebody up like that, but they did, and they were able to save him. And I believe he went on for a good while after that.
He played a few seasons after that, but he was really never the same after getting your neck sliced open.
Yeah.
So, and it was also traumatic and mentally for him. And he said that was the most difficult part of like healing from that, which he still struggles with to this day. One of the people that was suturing him up was a Vietnam War veteran, and he knew to like stick his hand like right into his neck to stop the bleeding, and didn't take his hand off until they had all the sutures and stuff. That's a little fun fact. Vietnam War veteran. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, Clint Malarchuk is one of the people. He's one of several people who've been sliced in the neck during a hockey game because, again, they have knives on their feet when they're running around and decimating the shit out of each other. Fighting in hockey. I want to talk about it. Explain to me, like I'm 5, why there are full-on fist fights in hockey that are not stopped by the refs immediately when they start. Like, it's a touchstone of hockey.
Well, all right, so a lot of hockey is different than other sports in the way that it kind of self-governs. It's a very fast sport. There's a lot going on at once. There's a lot that the referees can't maintain or control just by themselves. There's a couple linesmen, a couple refs on the ice at a time, and there's no way that they can. There's 10 players skating around. There's 2 goalies, and there's no way they can pay attention to everything all at once. So that's why it's kind of self-governing. So let's say you have you have like a Patrick Kane, right? Okay, so he's not a big guy, but he scores a lot of goals. And let's say you have somebody on the opposing team that comes after him pretty hard. You know, tries to put him into the boards, or tries to, while the ref's not looking, tries to injure him, because that's what they want to do. They want to diminish his ability to score. And the way that it's self-governing is then somebody on the other team is going to come out there, like whoever did that to like a Patrick Kane, or examples on other teams, is going to come out there and attack that person. So basically, it's a way of guarding your own players. It's a way that if you're getting bullied, if somebody on one team is bullying your star players, that other team is going to send out their biggest guy to either put that guy on the ice, and if they do, then that other team is going to reciprocate by sending their big guy out, and there's going to be a fight, and they're going to have to answer for what they do. So basically, it's just a way of like, it's a checks and balance sort of thing where you're not going to go after that star player knowing that there's going to be some bigger guy coming after you later.
Who's going to beat the shit out of you like an animal.
Exactly. And if when it comes to it, that's why the refs just let it happen, because that's when those 2 players will fight, and then it's kind of a statement of, don't do this anymore. Don't come after our star players. It works a lot of times. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes that's why there's 3 or 4 fights in a game. Sometimes that's why there's brawls. But it's kind of it's just a way of letting them hash it out themselves and finding a solution that the refs can't.
I like that you use the word bullying. Like when someone's getting bullied, they're going to send a bigger guy to beat the shit out of him. Yeah. I feel like that should be on every anti-bullying PSA. I don't know why we've decided to do this like be nice to other people thing. I think it's get a guy who's huge.
Yeah.
Get him to enforce. They call them enforcers,
They
right?
call them enforcers, yeah.
Is that the PC word for goon?
I would say they're both kind of PC in the hockey world.
Oh.
Goon, enforcer. They're both interchangeable.
I love that.
There's a good movie called Goon and Goon 2.
I think I've actually seen Goon. Yeah. Goon 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Stifler's in it.
It's just for me. So in this major league sport, you have men on ice beating the shit out of each other as a way of self-governing instead of just hiring another referee.
I don't think it's that. I think it's hockey's very unique in this way where it's very traditional. It's very kind of like how baseball is. Like with baseball with like superstition and other traditions that they have. Hockey's very much like this is how it's always been. However, right now there's a huge movement to get fighting out of the league. As it continues, players keep getting smaller and faster. It's all about contracts. The smaller and faster you are, the more goals you can score. And then the more energy it takes to try to protect those goal scorers, right? And so especially as I think that the NFL has an influence on it too, where the more concussions that happen in the NFL, it's kind of looked at it like, well, hockey, I mean, what are you guys doing? Like, let's get fighting out of this sport. Which...
Do you support?
I do not.
I do not either.
I think hockey should... continue with the tradition of allowing fighting. That's not a popular opinion on all sides. It's almost like, I would say it's like probably right now it's probably like 60% allow fighting, 40% let's get rid of it. And as time goes on, I would see it going the direction of getting rid of fighting. I don't agree. A lot of old school hockey players and fans also don't agree.
The good news is there's a lot of compilations of hockey players fighting each other online, specifically Rob Ray compilations. Rob Ray he was on the Sabres, right?
Absolutely.
And his style of fighting would be to have the other guy take his shirt off for him while he's beating the shit out of him.
Yep.
So his shirt comes off, all pads, all his shirt comes off every single time he's in a fight.
his whole thing
enchanting.
was he kind of figured. I grew up watching tons of Rob Ray fights, and he's a smart guy. He still does color commentating for the Sabres, and he understands the game. But his whole theory was if you don't have a shirt on, it gives them nothing to grab onto to pull you closer so they can punch you. And it worked. He won a lot of fights without a shirt on.
He's like, I know this is not a reference you're going to understand, but he's like Gibby from iCarly.
Oh, iCarly.
Listen. It's really enchanting. I'm going to put a link in the description for Rob Ray fights.
I'll click it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. At least we got one click out there. So this is all window dressing that I wanted to set up, that these men are playing this incredibly dangerous sport that does result in a substantial amount of injuries, substantial enough where you would want good health insurance for it. And I want to touch on what you said before. It's a very traditional sport. So these guys are doing this for the love of the game. Not that anyone who plays sports doesn't like the game, but hockey, the specific hockey culture is something I also wanted to talk about before we get into this scandal.
Absolutely, yeah.
That people, it's very tight-knit. That's what I wanted to say. Very tight-knit culture.
Yeah, you're very right.
And the people who are, you can even look up fights like this online, which I did. You told me to, and I did, where people get into a fight and then they're like, how's it going back at home? You know, like they grew up playing hockey together, and then they go into this. Right,
it's just a job. They don't actually sometimes they do hate each other, but most of the time it's just, they're just doing what they have to do out there.
There's one compilation on YouTube of mic'd up fights, and one of them is like, "You want it?" And the other one's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "This is kind of horny."
Yeah, that's how it goes. They'll talk to each other, be like, "All right, well, we're gonna fight." Like it's planned, you know.
It's charming. But I want to talk about the NHL Players Association, the thing that is meant to protect these guys doing the sport they love, that is very dangerous, that they are paid substantially less for than as compared to other major league sports. The NHLPA scandal of the 90s will wind up sending a man to prison. That's the foreshadowing here. A man is going to go to jail over this. Actually, the founder of the NHLPA went to prison for being bad at what he does and doing it illegally. This story would not come together were it not for the incredible reporting of Russ Conway, who's the author of this book that I'm holding. Russ Conway was working at the Eagle Tribune, a local newspaper in the Boston area. His first story he wrote at 18 years old was an expose on the poor conditions of the Lawrence High School football team's locker room. Charming. At 19, he started covering sports, and as a result, he became pretty good friends with a bunch of guys on the Boston Bruins. Mind you, this is 1968, which is a time that the NHL players... that NHL players and journalists didn't have that much of a pay discrepancy. You were getting paid a lot as a journalist and peanuts as an NHL player. Because he's around and covering them all the time, they sincerely trust him as a friend and confidant. Consequently, he was invited to a reunion event for the Bruins in 1990. At said reunion, the players are continuously profusely complaining about their pensions, their health insurance, all of it, which launched Conway into an entire investigation that, again, winds up sending a man to prison. Conway, this is a quote about him from a write-up in, I think it's also the Lawrence Tribune. Conway tells time through cars. He began working on the Eagleson story 2 vets ago. Corvettes. This is a picture of him.
Badass.
Badass dude. He loves Corvettes. He loves car racing, and he had like side businesses that he talks about in the book of doing like car racing, which is also why he becomes good friends with everybody, because he just like does car racing with them.
Who doesn't want that friend?
This guy he's wearing sunglasses in this photo, and he's posing with a vet, and he's got his hand on his hip. He's like a journalist. This guy fucking rocks. Russ details his investigation in the book Game Misconduct, Alan Eagleson and the Corruption of Hockey. I have a copy of it right here, and if you're watching, you can see that I'm holding it up. You can't get it as an ebook because, of course you can't, but it's an enchanting read. He winds up a runner-up for a fucking Pulitzer Prize because of his reporting, which again, mind you, is for a completely random local newspaper. This guy's not a sports investigator by trade. He's just a guy who got curious about something and then was a runner-up for a Pulitzer. He slays. He's a guy who had the time. So this is where the episode is turning busted as shit. The NHLPA. In 1967, the NHLPA is formed as a direct result of Alan Eagleson's advocacy. Alan Eagleson is from North Ireland, but spent a majority of his time in Toronto, Canada. He grew up short, really short. As a result, he develops a bitter and aggressive attitude. He's a fast-talking guy who gets by on wits alone. However, he hits a major growth spurt in college and then winds up huge. So he's a huge guy with a personality of a tiny man. From Conway, quote, "Now he was as big as his peers and twice as aggressive." That's the kind of man, and I think this is him on the cover.
Okay.
He's a big dude, and he's really aggressive. Here's a quote from the book that has absolutely no context, but is meant to describe the kind of person Alan Eagleson is. Quote, "While his sister was honeymooning, Alan Eagleson unwrapped her wedding presents and prominently displayed them as prizes at a carnival booth where he was guessing weights and ages. To the side were the cheap prizes that he actually gave out. At the end of the day, he rewrapped the wedding gifts and returned them to his sister."
I love that.
I read that and I was like, what the fuck do you mean?
That's amazing.
Like, am I in a K-hole right now? What do you mean? Says one of his closest working acquaintances, quote, "He's the only man I know who in a social gathering in a restaurant would blatantly use the word fuck, and no one would say anything to him. Everything was fuck this and fuck that. It was awful. I was always taught that you couldn't find a proper word, then rearrange your sentence, but you certainly don't stoop to vulgarity." I kept that last part in the quote because I was like, what a charming guy.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of common now.
Using the word fuck in social situations. Yeah. In that moment, I was like, I'm a little bit.
Do you think he started it?
Yeah, he
was
probably
he the first?
did.
He's a pioneer. He's a real trailblazer of the fuck word at a restaurant. This fucking iced tea sucks.
When Russ Conway called him to get some more information about the Players Association, he was like, "Oh, get your fucking story somewhere else. Go fuck yourself. Just fuck this and fuck that." Like, it's to everybody. He's like, I don't give a fuck. He was truly a pioneer.
No.
Rest in peace. Just kidding. He's still alive.
Oh.
He ran for and secured some sort of meaningful spot in the Canadian government, becoming friends with a few future prime ministers. This is important later because a lot of higher-ups in Canada really enjoy his company. He also gets a law degree and spends a lot of time representing hockey players. As he represents these players, he becomes a champion for them, ultimately forming the National Hockey League Players Association in 1967. Of great importance, he does not stop being a lawyer for some of the specific players during the time that he's also the NHLPA president. If that sounds like a couple different hats that you shouldn't be wearing,
right,
you'd be right.
Yeah.
Circling back to 1990, Russ Conway is invited to the Boston Bruins 20-year reunion, which is mostly orchestrated by Bobby Orr. Do you know who that is?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay, he's like that hockey famous?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We'll talk about him at length, but I guess he made a goal in mid-air to take the Bruins to the Stanley Cup.
Famously, yep.
This clip is kind of insane because it was in 1970, so nobody's wearing helmets in it. It's nuts. Anyways, at this 1990 reunion, one of the players is shooting the shit with Russ and is like, "By the way, is your newspaper hiring? Like, I'm hurting for money." And Russ was like, "What the fuck do you mean?" He didn't say fuck, probably. It wasn't invented yet. He said, "What do you mean?" And this player says, "Even though I played 16 seasons for the NHL, my pension is $13,000 per year, which my family cannot live on. $13K in the 90s would be something like $29,000 a year now, which is famously not a lot of money."
Right.
Russ is like, "Well, couldn't you go to the National Hockey League Players Association for some help?" And the player's like, "No, that's hilarious. The president only helps out his former clients with any help as it relates to pensions. So Russ gets curious. He's just like me for real. And he reads a pretty damning report about Alan Eagleson that had come out a year prior. In the report, it says, quote, Alan Eagleson has been a vital part of the NHL establishment, famously not the NHLPA, the NHL establishment. He's contributed greatly to keeping salaries down, profits up. He's helped maintain monopoly status. He keeps players tied up. He allows the league to control through non-impartial arbitration. He eliminates freedom whenever it raises its head. And he keeps you in the dark about the economics of the league while he's singing management's song about the fragile NHL. Our conclusion is that Alan never fully disclosed the extent of his conflicts to the members of the NHLPA. To which Russ writes, strong stuff. The report was a goldmine, revealing half a dozen seams worth following. I figured there was enough there to keep me going for the next 6 months. I was off by 5 years.
Wow.
Banging. I love this guy. It's probably like 5 vets. So for the next 6-ish years of his life, Russ Conway falls down this rabbit hole that will wind up, again, being the main impetus for Alan Eagleson's imprisonment. What did he find out?
What did he find out?
Are you curious?
I am.
That'll be right after this ad from BetterHelp. BetterHelp is an online therapy. I'm kidding. Listeners of the pod are going to love that one. I didn't even write that in the script. That was off the cuff.
That was good.
Thank you.
Yeah, you had me convinced. I started thinking, like, are we sitting through this?
You're like, you don't record this in post? Jesus Christ. So, not Russ Conway, Alan Eagleson was wearing a suspicious amount of hats. Frankly, a dubious amount of hats. First and foremost, as Conway's investigating how the NHLPA works, he finds that Alan Eagleson is serving as an agent for some of the players. He's a union president, but he also deals directly with insurance. Specifically, he was in charge of insurance for both the players and fucking management of the NHL. There's no thing in the history of ever where the union leader is also in charge of fucking insurance for the bosses. That's crazy.
Right.
Also, this is not in my script, it's just in the book, and I didn't want to just do like a word-for-word retelling of the book, but the NHL owned the insurance agency that it was insuring the players through, which was it was called ICE, I-C-E, haha, cute, NHL, and it was run out of Bermuda in like a tiny broom closet office. This is not important.
Well, what is it though?
Well, Russ was like, what the fuck do you mean, like, the NHL owns the insurance? Because then they can just, like, deny claims or whatever, and it's not making...
Right, isn't that a conflict of interest?
It's a huge conflict of interest, actually. Right. That you're really not supposed to do. Consequently, the insurance for the players, especially as it relates to disability insurance, was fucking terrible. Do you know who Ed Key is?
I don't.
Ooh, a hockey player you don't know. He had suffered some sort of injury during an NHL game, and he was under a one-way contract, meaning... he was playing for the St. Louis team. I don't know what they're called.
The Blues?
The Blues. Mm-hmm. And the way his contract was written was, we are going to put you in the minor leagues because you got like kind of hurt during this game. However, you still get all the benefits as if you were still like under contract with the NHL. And he has no rights to say like, no, I'm not going to the minors, right? They say you're going to the minors. He's like, all right, I'm packing my bags. So he gets sent to a minor league game, then suffers a devastating brain injury during this minor league game, which again, his contract was still like under the NHL. So he should be entitled to all those benefits. The injury left him disabled for life. This minor league injury that he had suffered, that was a traumatic brain injury. Quote, that insurance for the players under NHL contracts playing in the minors was the responsibility of the NHLPA. And apparently, Eagleson had not paid the premiums, so it had lapsed for NHLPA members playing in the minors. Eagleson never told Key that he was not insured. Key was supposed to get $100,000 for the disability. He eventually got $20,000 3 years later.
No way.
Yeah.
Wow.
Ed Key had a wife and 4 children. He's unable to work for the rest of his life, not just in hockey, but in other things too, because his wife has to help him get dressed in the morning.
Right.
He died at 51 years old. His son is a stand-up comedian.
51. Wait, his son does stand-up?
Yeah, his son does stand-up comedy. I almost said his son does stand-up comedy.
It all makes sense.
His tweets were fine. I went through some of his Twitter feed.
Yeah.
You know,
good one-liners. Yeah,
nothing highlight worthy enough to put into the script, but maybe we'll book him at the Lincoln Lounge. I don't know. Yeah. I'll send him an email. Anyways, yeah, Ed Key suffers this traumatic brain injury and basically was uninsured for it, and he only got that $20,000 3 years later due to unwavering advocacy from his wife.
And then what are you going to do with it?
And then exactly, what the fuck are you going to do? How are you supposed to do anything with that? Literally every professional sport imaginable. This is a tangent of this. The industry standard is that people's salaries are disclosed. Curiously, Alan Eagleson was staunchly against salary disclosure, citing absolutely cockamamie reasons like it's bad for the game, the other players will resent you if they know how much you make, etc., etc. But as Conway points out, quote, by resisting salary disclosure, not only was Eagleson scoring points with the owners, he was also serving his own self-interest as an agent. Eagleson represented many players individually. So long as salaries were not disclosed, he had an unfair advantage over competing agents. After all, he had more knowledge of salaries than anybody else. So he's still negotiating player contracts while he's the NHLPA executive director. I think I've been calling him the president this whole time, and I think that's wrong. I think he's the executive director.
Is this the same guy that's wearing all the hats?
Mm-hmm. Alan Eagleson.
Which none of them are helmets. As we know.
You know what? I saw you think of that joke, and that was a reach to get there. And I'm proud of you for making it.
Did you see the wheels turning?
Yeah, I did.
Smoke coming out of my ears.
The both of us are putting an extraordinary effort in to make this even seminally interesting or fun because
I'm all in.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just me then because
this is a top shelf podcast
where Mama keeps the cookies.
Yeah, you know it.
As it's later found out, Alan Eagleson was best friends with several team owners, including Bill Wirtz of the Chicago Blackhawks. Eagleson famously fucked over star player Bobby Orr in his final year of playing hockey. Are you familiar?
Why don't you fill me in?
Orr had wanted to finish out his career with the Bruins. He suffered some sort of injury in his second to last year, and the next year he's like, I know this is going to be my last one. He was badly injured, knew it would be his last season, and Eagleson told him that the Bruins referred to him as damaged goods and that Chicago was offering this unbelievable deal. So even though Bobby Orr really wanted to finish his NHL career in his hometown where his family lived, he then was traded to the Chicago Blackhawks. The thing is, as it was later found out, the Bruins had actually offered an incredible amount of money and an 18.5% ownership stake in the team, which would be worth millions now if he had taken it. Eagleson never told Orr about this deal and instead went with the Blackhawks, a deal that famously earned him and his friend Bill Wirtz a lot of money. Well, it didn't earn Bill Wirtz a lot of money. It just earned him a lot of clout for having Bobby Orr on his fucking team. So his connection with Bill Wirtz is expanded on at length in the book, but they're super best friends. And it was directly at the expense of Bobby Orr that Eagleson fulfills this contract. Which again, he's supposed to be representing the best interest of the players.
Sure.
But he really, you know what? Why do that when your bestie is Bill Wirtz of the Chicago Blackhawks?
You know.
Alan Eagleson also famously fucked up hockey players' pensions in every imaginable degree. A pension, mind you, for those uninitiated, is some set amount of money that you are paid for the rest of your life, or sometimes in a lump sum, because you worked at a company. The bosses set aside a certain amount of money for you, and you also contribute to it by having some money taken out of your paycheck. Alan Eagleson was in charge of pensions for the players. Many of their pensions fell below the poverty line, which is insane for a major league sport that was pretty major at the time. Oh, also, I didn't put this in the script. Remember I was saying that there were several hockey leagues at the time, so the NHL is still struggling to become...
Right, yeah.
There was a merger of the NHL and the WHA, the World Hockey Association, which every single player was against because that was one of the only competitive leagues, so it would increase your salary to have, other options.
Right.
You say, oh, well, you're paying me pennies, I'm going to go to the WHA. This merger, none of the players support it, but Alan Eagleson is all in for it, and then they merged, and that... left a lot of people with not a lot of options.
Born that monopoly.
Right, there it is. So Alan Eagleson's in charge of pensions for the players. Sorry, I want to circle back to that. Many of their pensions fell below the poverty line. Per Conway, quote, one of the most pathetic stories I heard came from Judy Hayes, the widow of Hall of Fame linesman George Hayes, who worked 1,704 NHL games. He died in 1987. When her husband died, she said, she was offered a lump sum of $1,032 or a monthly pension of $1,698.
That's not even your rent.
She turned down the lump sum offer and said, quote, I wouldn't take it for a couple reasons. I wanted them to deposit it in my bank account because I figured it would probably cost them more than $1,698 a month to do that. I thought if they could be ridiculous, I could be just as ridiculous. And she also said, it's a great conversation piece.
For what it's worth.
Yeah. Hockey people are so fucking funny. It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Chirping. Oh, my God.
And what is chirping?
Chirping is the ability of hockey players to make fun of each other, and they will dig deep. And you watch these guys skate around on the ice, and they're punching, with all the fights and all the brutality in hockey. You're like, oh, these guys, they're playing a sport, and they're just going fast, and they're trying to beat each other up. But then the level of just how clever they can be when they're making fun of each other. And they will hit every single nerve. They will know something that a player did 5 years ago that they hope nobody remembers, and they'll bring it up in the most clever way at the worst time. And those are more important than the actual fights.
Speaking of chirping, you know who's bad at chirping? Alan Eagleson. He was asked at a conference about pensions. It was something like, when will you stop doing XYZ? And he chirped back, when will you stop beating your wife?
There you go. That's not clever, but
That's not clever. It's not related.
It's kind of like he heard somebody he heard somebody chirping very well one day. He's like, I could do that. I'll do it off the cuff. And then he tried it, and somebody wrote it down. And he kind of regretted it.
I don't think he has any regrets about any of the things he said to journalists. He should have thrown a fuck in there.
Yeah. Well, maybe he regretted not saying fuck. You fucking beat your wife.
Additionally, remember how I said he hosted he was like brainchild of the Canada, not the brainchild, he invented the Canada Cup? Yep. The revenue from that, the players were told, directly benefited their pension fund. And they didn't have to play in the Canada Cup, right? You volunteer to do the Canada Cup. The revenue from it, again, they're told, goes into their NHL pensions. As it turns out, what was not mentioned is that the surplus revenue from the Canada Cup was to offset the owner contributions to the pension. So there was no extra money being made. It meant that the owners had to pay less for the pension because it directly offsetted their thing.
Wow.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Is this making any sense?
Yeah.
So that was not discovered until years later, and players were obviously mad about it. And because you're not supposed to do that.
Right, can't imagine why.
Finally, and I wanted to save this goofy one for last, Alan Eagleson simply misappropriated NHLPA funds to live a lavish lifestyle. Here's some things that he spent their money on. This is the part of the podcast where I'm getting a book out, a real life book. Oh no, I touched the cable again. Crap. So there was whenever the financial audit came out, this is 1987 to 1989, there were a bunch of things marked SM, which stands for special meeting. And that really tickled me. I wanted to tell you about it. So anyways, here is a list of things that Alan Eagleson spent his money on. So he spent between 1987 and 1989 $30,000 on special meetings, on SMs, if you will. He spent $52,000 for promotion, gifts, and awards, for $59,000 separately for game tickets that he would give out to people to come to the games. Mind you, this is all from the players' fund, so this is money that could be used in a player pension or whatever. But
what's the special gifts and awards? What does that mean?
It doesn't say.
That's just what he wrote down.
$17,000 for miscellaneous, business lunch, coffee, sugar, pop, film processing.
Sugar.
You know what? You got to make it sweet.
I guess so.
This guy who likes it, real sweet. $238,000 for airline tickets under 2 different accounts, one of which is for special meetings.
Wow.
Special meetings really tickles me, and I'm glad it also tickles you.
The Venn diagram of special meetings with everything else going on.
$183,000 for hotels under 3 different accounts, players' meetings, special meetings.
Oh.
And for promotion, gifts, and awards. $101,000 for office and general expenses, including a $15,000 payment to Raycon, which is his company. Not Raytheon or Raycon the glasses, or Ray-Bans, that's what I was thinking of. He owns a different law firm called Raycon, and RAE stands for R. Allen Eagleson. And
is he still a lawyer this whole time? Sorry.
He is still a lawyer this whole time.
This
whole time. He's still
wearing
lawyering.
that helmet. Going back to that well as often as I can.
There was a player, Andre Savard, I believe his name is, who was disabled from an injury he sustained during a hockey game, asked for insurance, and Eagleson told him, okay, you have to pay $8,000 for the legal fees incurred in getting you the insurance, because it was a big fight, which, as it's later discovered, it was absolutely not a big fight ever for him to get insurance. But that $8,000 was for Raycon, the company. So Andre Savard is talking to Russ Conway about this, and he's like, yeah, like I had to pay $8,000 to Raycon. And Russ Conway's like, oh, that's Alan Eagleson's company. And he's like, what?
Oh,
he had no idea. And so Russ Conway's like, that stands for R. Allen Eagleson, like Raycon.
Wow.
Russ Conway's like really involved in many ways in this book. Like he's directly in the story. He was one of the first people to tell Bobby Orr that like the Bruins had offered him actual money to stay on the team, and Bobby Orr was like, I had no idea. You're telling me like it's the first I've heard.
You're blowing my mind right now.
Am I?
Yeah.
Slay.
I don't know about any of this.
I'm so glad that you didn't know any of it. There was one time where I was at Christian's house and he was like, "Can I show you a video?" And I was like, "Sure." And he goes, "I'm sorry, it's 29 minutes long." I was like, "Great." It was a Rick Jenneret compilation and it was awesome.
It's called Top Shelf.
Mama keeps the cookies. And you...
Hides the cookies.
Oh, yeah. Hides the cookies?
Yeah, I didn't want to correct you before.
You can. It's okay. You know so much about hockey, so it's really delighting me that I'm presenting you information that you don't know.
Mm-hmm. It's delighting me too.
Amazing. Mm-hmm. $36,000 for gifts. It just says gifts. $26,000 for meals under 2 accounts, which is players' meetings and promotion gifts and awards. No special meetings this time. $19,000 for golf and tennis club dues. $14,000 for limo, taxi, and car rental. $13,000 for international hockey airline tickets, hotels, and meals. $12,000 for YMCA memberships for Eagleson and the NHLPA Director of Operations, Sam Simpson.
Where do you find a $12,000 YMCA?
$2,000.
Oh.
I hope I said that.
Never mind. That seems right.
They go to the fancy YMCA. The list of expenses is by no means exhaustive. The NHLPA picked up this tab for many other things along the way. Eagleson billed the union $1,560 during a July 1987 trip to London, England for 8 meals. 8 meals for $1,500. That's crazy. The union also paid for theater tickets for its insurance pals and Wimbledon tickets. The union also paid for Wimbledon tickets for 2 of Eagleson's conservative party cronies and a sports writer pal. In 1987, Eagleson billed the NHLPA $1,000 for tickets, including 2 for Roy McMurdy, 1 for Tom Wells, 1 for George Gross of the Toronto Sun. So...
The only thing I kind of agree with there is the $1,500 for 8 meals, because that's like $200 a meal. I mean, I feel like I could easily... You go to a nice restaurant,
and it just starts flowing.
Yeah, like a bottle of wine, a nice steak, and an appetizer, and a healthy tip, and maybe dessert. I don't really do dessert, but I'm saying it's the word. Like, who needs it?
Why do you need to eat after them? You've eaten the best part of the meal.
You already ate. Yeah.
He did already eat. Why did I like a
Let's nice... celebrate with more food.
Job well done. Now do it again. So he's grossly misappropriating union funds, which is, as the kids say, not a good look. And
they do say that. Yeah.
They do say that, don't
I've heard it out there.
So circling back to the insurance thing, though, for a second, Alan Eagleson committed a litany of other insurance frauds in his day. One case was with Trevor Johansson, who played in the NHL for 5 years and got fucked up because of it, needed disability insurance. Like many other players, he wasn't informed of when he had to make his claim and of this 20-game cured rule, which is that if you play 20 games after an injury, you are legally considered cured of that injury and you can no longer file a claim for it, which was a rule that changed after Ed Key, and Ed Key was never told about that, so that made it even harder for him. Anyways, back to Trevor Johansson. If you play 20 games after an injury, it's legally classified as cured, but also pre-existing conditions also disqualify you from disability insurance, like a previous injury. So if that previous injury happens, that means if something kind of related happens, you are not qualified because that's the pre-existing condition, is that first injury. So it's this catch-22 where nobody's able to get their fucking disability payments. Anyways, I bring up Trevor Johansson because I think he had a really profound insight about it that I wanted to read to you. This is what he tells to Russ Conway. Quote, "The problem with hockey players is that they just want to play. The average NHL player is very young and extremely focused. In my case, I always felt it was a responsibility to rush back after an injury. The insurance companies know that players will make heroic efforts to return, and the pre-existing clause is built around that. The classic examples are the Jim Harrisons or the Ed Keys who are ignored after dedicating themselves to their teams and quickly forgotten." Which I think really gets at the heart of...
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking the same thing right before you just read that. That when we were talking about earlier, just like how the hockey culture is of like it's hockey or nothing for these people, and that's how dedicated they are. That they will I don't care about the money, I don't care about the insurance until you get older and you realize I should have thought of that, but that is how it is, They just want to play the sport. It's more about the sport than it is about money or fame or anything.
And this is going to come up later, too. I'm saying later as if we're not already 40 minutes into the podcast. After Conway's bombshell drops, other U.S. media outlets also look into it. In 1994, Eagleson was charged by the FBI with 34 counts of racketeering, obstruction of justice, embezzlement, and fraud in Boston. Per Wikipedia, I guess I wrote in here, quote, however, he still had enough political clout from his days as an MPP and a power broker with the progressive conservatives to stave off extradition to the United States from Canada until 1997. So he was charged in 1994 and got to just chill in Canada for 3 years.
That sounds nice.
After a 3-year investigation, the RCMP charged Eagleson with 8 counts of fraud and theft. Some of Eagleson's former clients, including Bobby Orr, remarked that it had not been for the United States justice system, he would have never been charged. After being arrested, one FBI agent remarked that Eagleson, quote, just didn't get it, as the former sports agent was tinkering with police equipment while being booked.
No way. This is all so mind-blowing. I can't wait to read that book.
Yeah. You're going to see so many dumb highlights and dumb shit that I wrote in that book.
I'm.
You'll get the director's
I think
commentary.
I might be looking forward more to the highlights and the smiley faces on the corners of the page, because then I know which ones are nice. You know, like this is a good page, and if I come across a frowny face, like, well, skip this one. You know, which is good for me because I'm terrible at reading.
And you're so delighted about this book. You're excited about the pictures in the book.
There are pictures?
There are pictures. Actually, there's 2 sections of pictures.
Nice.
On January 6th of 1998, Eagleson pled guilty to 3 counts of mail fraud in Boston and was fined $70,000. Later that year, he pled guilty in Toronto to 3 more counts of fraud and embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Canada Cup. And so he was sentenced to 18 months in prison, of which he served 6 months.
Wow.
At the Mimico Correctional Center in Toronto. He was disbarred after all this, but still enjoys a relatively quiet and peaceful life in Canada because, again, people still like this guy in Canada.
Well, sure, yeah.
Anyways, this happens in the early 90s, and that is sort of the end of the Alan Eagleson saga. So he's the founder of the NHLPA who did all of that cockamamie bullshit and wound up in prison for it. But that's not where this story ends, because mind you, at the beginning of the episode, I wondered, why was there a year where there was no hockey? I wanted to dig into that a little bit more. So Bob Goodnow is the successor to Alan Eagleson. Bob Goodnow orchestrated the first NHL strike in 1992, which notably gave players the rights to the marketing of their own images, which I guess they didn't have before.
Right, yeah. There was more than one lockout, too.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Right. Okay.
We will be talking about these lockouts, baby. In the 1994-1995 season, there's a lockout. The lockout is because owners want to instate a salary cap. Can you explain to me, like I'm 5, what a salary cap is?
Well, basically, I mean, the simplest way to put it is just how much money a team can spend on their players' salaries. And that is supposed to limit the talent that you can hire. And it's kind of like, I don't know, like one of those plans that somebody has that should go one way, but it is not what it looks like on paper, like communism. Kind of, you know, like Marx is like, this sounds great, you know, like this week we could really make this work, and it didn't. That's a salary cap.
Great.
Yep.
Yeah, it limits the amount of money teams can spend on a player. So if you get a star player like Wayne Gretzky and you're paying him a bunch of money, you would have to get rid of some of your other little guys and get littler guys that you pay less money to. And it prevents teams from having a bunch of players that they paid a lot of money for. You know, that's the theory, at least. The collective bargaining agreement. So that is a main sticking point of the 1994-1995 lockout thing that happened, which does not happen. Like, the salary cap is not instated in 1995. The collective bargaining agreement made under Bob Goodnow essentially triples the average player salary as a result of the 1995 strike. Before him, the average salary was in the $200K range, and after it increased to over $1 million. This guy is beloved by the NHLPA. There was understandably a lot of catching up that he had done, which is a result of the tripling of the salary, but it was astonishing what he got done. The one reason why everyone loved him as well is because he was super against the salary cap. But Christian, let me tell you a story. It's a tragedy.
Let me hear it.
But we tell it anyway. So this is a story of why hockey disappeared in 2004-2005. From a monthly labor review article by Paul D. Stoudahar, quote, in a widely publicized study, the NHL retained Arthur Levitt, a former chairman of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, to examine its finances. Although Levitt's work was an independent study, he was paid $250,000 by the league, apparently without the union's knowledge. Levitt found that the league lost $273 million in the 2003 season, with 19 teams losing money and 11 teams were profitable. In an earlier internal report, the league found that it had spent 76% of its annual revenue on player salaries, significantly more spending than other sports. However, the teams understate revenues by directing them to related businesses entities, thereby creating a falsely bleak picture. For example, the Chicago Blackhawks claimed no revenue from the 212 suites that the team owns in the United Center, where it plays home games. But the Blackhawks owner, Bill Wirtz, owns half the arena in a separate corporation. So that's why the NHL doesn't make any money off it, because Bill Wirtz does. And it's money that is coming in, but it's not reported on the NHL thing. So there's a lot of issues like that in this report that comes out. But the media runs with it. They're like, these players are so greedy. They make so much of the money. How can they want more money? And so, the NHL runs this story as a very compelling one, that the players are greedy. They eat up 76% of the revenue, and that owners are losing money hand over fist. Which is just so stupid, because these guys are all 100 millionaire billionaires. They would not invest in a thing that loses that much money.
Sure.
They're not dumb. So the story's like, oh, these poor 100 millionaires, they're losing so much money, and they stay with these teams because they love the sport and they love the towns. It's stupid. It's fucking dumb. I'm mad. I don't know why. I got mad about it.
I like the passion.
Yeah, this kind of thing does piss me off to no end. So, are you familiar with the story of Orpheus and Eurydice?
I have a feeling you're going to fill me in about that too.
You're so right. That is what this podcast is telling people about things. So, I wanted to take a break from talking about, the NHL to talk about Orpheus and Eurydice. It's this ancient Greek myth where they're two lovers and they live on Earth as people do. And Eurydice goes to hell. It's different in the tellings why she goes to hell. There's a Broadway musical about it that I really like. She's in hell. It's actually what I just saw. I went to go see it with a woman playing Hermes, and then when I went, it was a fucking male understudy.
That was a tragedy.
And that was a tragedy.
I remember that text message.
It's a sad tale. It's a tragedy, but we tell it anyway. So, anyways, she goes to hell, and then he comes to find her, and they let him leave hell with her on the condition that if he turns around to see that she's coming to, she'll disappear and go back into hell. It's a test of how much do you trust each other? How much do you trust yourself, your own mind? Are you going to fuck this up, basically? So that's the myth, right? That if he turns around, she's gone. And he does. Because he's a man.
Of course.
And it's a tragedy. And we tell it anyway. And it's a great musical. So, in the 2000s, so this report comes out saying all these players are greedy as hell, media's running with it. So, there's going to be a lockout in 2004-2005, orchestrated by Gary Bettman. Mm-hmm. He's your favorite, right?
Oh, I can't get enough of that guy.
He's one tall drink of water, isn't he?
Favorite bobblehead on earth.
And the lockout, Bob Goodenow, who is the executive director of the NHLPA, he knows that it's going to last a long time. And he tells all of these players, listen, we're going to lose a season over this. The owners have a lot of solidarity. They've been planning for this. They're willing to lose a season so we can get a fucking salary cap. I don't want that to happen. We're going to stay this out for 18 months. So there will be a full year where you don't play hockey and then some, because that's what it's going to take to convince these guys that we're not fucking around. We're not doing a salary cap. And much like Orpheus walking out of hell, that's what those 18 months were like, of like, well, do you trust each other? Is anyone going to make secret deals with the NHL? Is doubt creeping in, perhaps? And they had to spend all that time not playing hockey. They were in their hometowns going to the supermarket, and people were like, fuck you, you greedy asshole. You're the reason why my favorite thing is not on TV anymore.
I never thought about it like that.
Yeah?
I never thought about that aspect of it. Yeah, they were just walking around in their regular day lives, representing what the media was saying about them.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people living that life.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
It's a tragedy.
It is a tragedy.
So, just as Orpheus is about to step his one foot back on Earth, right, he turns around to see if Eurydice's coming. And much like that, Bob Goodenow's like, actually, there's a salary cap. I'm sorry. And then Eurydice falls back into hell, and the players have a salary cap, and they wasted all that time for nothing. Mm-hmm. That whole year they spent, and they have families to feed. They had no money coming in. All of the agents, all of the people that were ancillary related to them in the NHL, like they got laid off, like the equipment managers, they got laid off before the season even started, because the NHL owners knew they were going to not have a season.
And it's not like they were making bank beforehand. It's not like they had like this huge nest egg saved up.
Exactly. And so the owners can afford to not have a season because they're all hundreds of millionaires, whereas the players do not have that same thing, or the equipment managers or everybody else. So the salary cap comes out of it.
Wow. What a ride.
It's a tragedy, I'm telling you. I knew I like practiced that Orpheus and Eurydice thing in the Galway Bay Mirror last night drunk.
I gotta say, I was very impressed by that comparison.
It all came together in my head, and I was like, oh, I'm totally saying this
You
on the
just
podcast.
thought of that last night.
Yeah.
When we were doing karaoke at Galway Bay.
Yeah, so drunk.
Wow.
I was like, this is going to be awesome on the podcast.
I'm impressed.
So there's like nothing written here because I knew it. I wrote Orpheus and Eurydice thing. Strike is like that song Doubt comes in from the musical. Salary capped. Although it's linked to league revenues and has a salary floor, is instated after 2005. It's a tragedy.
Seriously.
So
what happens next? Yeah.
Circling back to the Sabres for the Now Do You Believe, they had traded away a bunch of their players because the salary cap had prevented them from keeping a bunch of the people that they wanted, like,
Chris Drury. Danny Briere.
There it is. Thank you.
There's others.
So that's why there was no hockey for a year, because of all this tension with the Players Association and all of this. Gary Bettman also had a job to do too, right, as the the commissioner of the NHL, and so he didn't want to be bad at his job by not doing the thing that was promised.
He's never bad at his job.
Oh yeah, I forgot that he's the guy that everyone boos the second he comes to a hockey game.
Every year when at the end of the playoffs, when he hands out the Stanley Cup to the winning team, he gets booed by the entire crowd.
Awesome.
As far back as I can remember, I've never seen him well received when he walks out onto the ice to make his bobblehead speech.
Fucking sweet.
Yeah, that's how you know you're doing a dandy job over there.
A bang-up job. Never in any other professional sport. Actually, it's probably a lie. I'm sure there's some professional sport where the league commissioner or the president comes out and people boo him.
I can't think of one. I don't know as much about other sports as I know about the NHL. The NFL, I can't think about people hating. I know a little bit. I watch championships of other sports. I've never seen somebody as hated as Gary Bettman by the general community that represents that sport. Never.
Pretty fucking sweet.
Yeah, and he just rides with it. The people boo him, and he just keeps making his speech. He just keeps bobbing his head back and forth. Well, the Stanley Cup champion of this year, blah 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 blah. And I have no idea what he's ever said because you can't hear him over the boos.
There was that contract or whatever that came out of that expired, I think, around 2012 or 2013, in which there's another hockey lockout. And that collective bargaining agreement under Donald Fehr, right after, 5 days after the salary cap thing, Bob Goodenow resigns in disgrace. He knew he fucked that one up real bad. And the guy that replaces him is only in there for like a year and a half, 2 years, and the union overwhelmingly voted to fire him because he also sucked at his job. The union has just never had a guy that is serving their best interests. Donald Fehr comes in whenever that other guy resigns, and he's still the NHLPA president to this day. The collective bargaining agreement that came out of 2013 is set to expire next year. It was a 10-year agreement. So there are many hockey commentators. I listen to hockey podcasts to prepare myself for this episode, and it's just because I like hockey now, I think.
Sure. Which ones?
It's just one hockey podcast. It's, actually, I don't even know if it's a hockey podcast. It has to be. It's called Agent Provocateur.
Ooh.
I know. It's a pretty solid. They're old as shit. One of them's on Zoom most of the time and you hear him crackling in and out, but I love that podcast. It's charming, enchanting. They think there's going to be another NHL lockout, those two, because it doesn't seem like the NHL or the NHLPA has learned from the mistakes of the past. And
yeah, they have not made a lot of progress.
No. And that is kind of where we're at with this whole shebang. So that's actually the end of the notes that I wrote for this episode. The NHL is an organization that has these players risking their lives on the ice every single day and will run a story about how greedy they are, will actively fight against any sort of increase in pay, and will fuck up their insurance. It had a guy that fucked up their insurance so badly that they were below the poverty line after they retired from this major league sport.
Wow, what a great national sport.
The great one nation.
Yes.
And that is what was so mind-boggling to me about the NHL, is how deep this went, because he was the president. Alan Eagleson, I was pointing at him like you can all see that. You can't. Alan Eagleson was the NHLPA executive director from 1967 to like 1992. That's a long tenure where he was constantly getting away with just skimming money off pension funds, going to Broadway plays. At least I hope he was going to Broadway plays. I don't know. Maybe he's seen
And buying gifts.
Buying gifts and doing special meetings.
Special meetings.
And the guy who's meant to represent the players and their interests doing this dangerous sport that they really, really love went to prison because he was so bad at it.
Shucks.
Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. There's a lot that I knew. There's a lot that I knew about that, as far as just like how poorly this sport was run. But you've really opened my eyes to a lot of things I did not know about. Thanks for doing all that research.
Oh, of course. Now, a lot of this was done today. I have not eaten. It's like 4 p.m. at time of recording. I have not eaten today. I woke up so hungover, shaking, like trying desperately to finish anything like this episode. So I'm glad that it clocked in at around an hour. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
And I actually have to work right now. I have to open it's 5:30 actually.
Yeah, thanks for covering me, by the way.
Oh, of course. I hope you have so much fun at dinner if you decide to go.
Yeah, we'll see.
And then have fun with your cousin tonight. Maybe I'll see you after.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, I will see you later, but I literally have to go put ice and stuff. So
all right.
That's it. Any final thoughts? I got to go, but if you want to put some final thoughts in there, you go for it.
I'm good.
All right, that's been Busted Business Bureau. Donate to the Patreon, patreon.com/BustedBizBureau. Like, subscribe, do whatever. I'll see you. Catch you on the flip side.